All right, what is going on, everyone? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into today's edition of GC Live, presented by Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market for a home, or you're looking to potentially buy a home, Clint is your guy to go to. He's a Columbia guy, big Gamecock fan, and a very long time supporter of Gamecock Central. So he's definitely your guy to go to. And if you're interested in potentially looking at a home, I know the housing market is kind of, whatever right now. I'm certainly not looking for a home right now, but if you are, go to clinthammond.com, or you can go ahead and call the number 803-422-6797. Again, the number to call Clint Hammond is 803-422-6797, and the NMLS number is 71597. So again, great guy to talk to you about your mortgage, home needs, whatever the case might be. Clint is your guy. And so we're gonna get right into the meat and potatoes of today. I know you guys are probably usually used to seeing Talking Tuesdays with our guy Mike Yuva, but obviously he has now moved to Rhode Island, where he's beginning a new journey, new job, back in TV. So super happy for Mike. So now I'm filling in on, it's not Talking Tuesdays, but just regular old GC Live. And today we've got a lot to talk about, as South Carolina, some of the offensive players spoke to the media earlier today. And just to run you guys through the list of who we spoke to, that included Gage Larvadain, Alex Herrera, Vandrevius Jacobs, Dale Von Campbell, Ja'Kai Moore, Lenore Sellers, and Rocket Sanders. So got to talk to a good chunk of the offense today. And reminder, this is the first time that, we've heard from the offense since last Thursday. And this is the first time we're hearing from them, in fall camp. So we were able to really, the local media at least was really able to hear and kind of see how practice has been going. I know it's, only 4 practices in right now, but, a lot has happened, obviously, since the last time we spoke to them. And let's kind of start in reverse order here, talking about players that I just listed. Let's get right into Rocket Sanders, because I'm sure that's the number one guy that y'all probably want to hear about. And so, obviously with Rocket, this is his, first time really going through practice now with South Carolina, because he missed all the spring. He transferred in from Arkansas back in January, but he had been recovering from shoulder surgery and rehabbing from that. So missed all the spring and is now just getting back into, practice with South Carolina this fall. And the latest update from him is that, everything's feeling good. He's not really limited at all in any sort of way. And it's more so about, it's not the fact that he's not limited or anything. It's more so about getting back up to game speed and feeling like he can be, that every down back that he was at Arkansas when he was healthy. So that's the main thing right now. But it is a great sign in general to hear that he's good to go. He's back at practice. And, he did say that there were definitely some nerves on the first day, last Friday, at the first fall camp practice. And that's totally justified, right? Because, this is a guy, like I said, hasn't suited up in God knows how long. And it's been a while for him. So obviously, with the shoulder surgery and stuff, I think anyone in that situation would be a little bit nervous at first. But obviously, once he kind of got back into the flow of things and got through that first practice, and now, the team is in pads and stuff. Some guys were coming in today with, their shoulder pads on and all that. So they're back in it now, back to the swing of things. And it looks like Rocket's feeling good. The real test, obviously, you best try to simulate what you're doing in a game-like situation in practice. But I think the real big first test for him, and I asked him about this a little bit, if y'all want to, read more about in depth of kind of what Rocket talked about, go to GamecockCentral.com. Just published a story on how he's been doing and what the recovery process this summer has been like for him, just like 20 minutes ago maybe. But anyway, I asked him a little bit about, South Carolina has their first scrimmage at Williams-Brice Stadium on Saturday. And, what are some of the goals that you have for that first scrimmage, since, this is like your first essentially your first game action, as best you can simulate or as close you can simulate it since last season. And, for him, it's more so about, like I said before, getting the feel for the game, kind of getting back into a rhythm. He said he wants to, take on tackling and taking on blocks again and learning, he's still learning the playbook and stuff and still learning how South Carolina is going to be running things from an offensive standpoint. So, right now, obviously, he's not going to be, 1,000%, maybe not, he's obviously healthy, but 1,000% ready in terms of feeling like he can go out there game one and, rush for 200 yards. Probably not yet, but it's a good sign that he's back out at camp, back at practice, and he's going to be, good to go. So, we'll talk to Shane Beamer on Saturday after the scrimmage. It's obviously a closed scrimmage, so no media, no fans or anything at Williams-Brice Stadium, but we will hear from Shane after that scrimmage on Saturday, and we'll hopefully get a better indication of, how Rocket looked, as well as a bunch of other players. And speaking of another player that, had a lot to say today was quarterback Lenore Sellers. And, with him, the main discussion has been the competition between himself and Robbie Ashford and, guys like Davis Bevel and, that quarterback room and how that's looking. And, I know some are going to say, it's Lenore's job right now. And that's obviously how it should be because, after last season, sitting behind Spencer Rattler and all the potential that Lenore brings to the table, this obviously should be his job to lose. And a lot of people are probably thinking that Lenore's has got it in the bag right now. But again, Robbie Ashford is someone that we probably still need to keep an eye on. And Lenore's was asked a few times about that competition, Robbie today. And, they try, and this kind of is a general theme for all the position groups and stuff. Whether there's a competition going on or not, they still try to, not make it all about that, rather focus on how they can make each other better and making sure that everyone is in a good spot right now, which I think is important because, sometimes I feel like, especially at a position like quarterback, a competition can definitely, I don't want to say divide you, but it can definitely create, that little tenseness, in a room. But it's good to see, especially at the quarterback position, these guys are wanting to make each other better and stuff. And with Lenoris, I mean, look, this is right now, as I said before, I think this is his job right now. It is his job to lose. And, him going through this fall is a lot different compared to last year. He talked about it today. Last year, he was just trying to get an understanding of the college game and a feel for how things worked at the college level, because he wasn't going to be starting with Spencer Rattler being the guy last year. But now that this is essentially kind of like his team, he feels a lot more comfortable, has a better understanding of the offensive system that Dowell Loggins has in place and kind of how to go about, preparation and handling the day-to-day aspects of practice. But for him, I did also ask him, what are some things that, this is a guy that has a lot of tools, plenty of tricks up his sleeve, but, with a guy that is so good, what are some things that he still feels like he, wants to improve upon? Because there's always stuff. I mean, you could be the best player in the world, but there's probably something that you want to be better at. And for him, it's more so having a better knowledge of, what to do as a player in certain situations. Because again, he hasn't been up against, consistently at least up against, SEC competition week in and week out. So I'm sure that's going to be an adjustment this year, but also being able to communicate on the field. I think, getting in the signals from Dowell Loggins up in the booth or, Shane on the sidelines, whoever's relaying those signals, getting that in and making sure all his, other 10 players on the field are on the same page. So I think that was probably a good answer to have. But just other things that stood out from him. And again, we don't have video right now from those press conferences, but I'm sure those will be posted on South Carolina Athletics YouTube relatively soon, and then eventually we'll get it on Gamecock Central's YouTube page. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But Sellers also just talked about how the offensive system. He was asked about how the offensive system is looking compared to last year with Spencer Rattler, and he was saying that it caters to the quarterback's strength. So, for instance, with Rattler, he's obviously more of a pass first kind of guy, really good arm and stuff. We've seen it last year, and we know what Spencer's all about. But with Sellers, the difference with him is the fact that he's more of a mobile quarterback, a guy that has a great arm. We've seen it before. We saw it last year when he threw that absolute dart to Tyshawn Russell in the Furman game in the later minutes of that game when the score was kind of out of hand. But with him, it's more so about having the game kind of be built around what he is best at. And obviously with him, he's not just a great passer, but he's also a pretty darn good runner. So I think that's all going to work out really well. And I think the same could be said for Robbie Ashford if Robbie's the guy at any point this year. And both these guys can run a bit, and they also can throw. They also can sling it. So I think that's good in the sense that Dowell Loggins is able to, while it's a pro style offense, they're able to, change it up enough to where it's not like it's the same thing every time and it catered to one guy like Spencer Rattler. It's built to, change and evolve and grow as each year goes on with, now Sellers at quarterback and potentially Robbie Ashford, whoever's going to be at quarterback this year. So I think that's good in that sense. And I think a lot of people are really interested to see what this offense does look like under, Lenora Sellers and the possibility of running more. I think we should expect to see South Carolina run the ball a lot more this year. And another guy that kind of leads me into talking about is Ja'Kai Moore. And, I think I asked him kind of about similar to Sellers, where do you feel like your strengths are right now? And where do you feel like one thing is that you want to improve upon for next season? I think he kind of misunderstood the question a little bit. And I think he took it as more like, what the team is looking like right now and what they're doing good at. And it was kind of actually a good answer in that sense that the run game has been looking really good so far in fall camp. Obviously, the story goes last year, South Carolina averages, about 85 yards rushing per game, and that was dead last in the SEC. So rushing was definitely a struggle last year for this team, and it made the offense kind of one-dimensional. And part of that goes hand in hand with the fact that the offensive line just wasn't getting enough push up front. 41 sacks last year, not protecting the quarterback well enough, and that led to averaging just about 3 yards a carry. So Ja'Kai was really just saying that the line is looking better this year, and in going in hand with that, the run game will also be stronger this year. And I honestly believe that because it's not like last year where you have no disrespect or anything. I think Mario Anderson was a solid running back for South Carolina, but he was your leading rusher with about, I think, 724 yards, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's right around that ballpark range. Your next best rusher was DeCarrion Joyner, who, again, no disrespect, fantastic player, great guy, great representation of what South Carolina football is all about. But he's a guy that's played, he started out as a quarterback when he first came to Carolina back in 2018, and then, moved to wide receiver and then became a running back his final year last season. So obviously the run game, when you look at it that way, was not good last year. Any way you drew it up, injuries aside, it just wasn't consistent at all. So with Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, Jawarn Howell, DJ Braswell, Juju McDowell, even Matthew Fuller, a freshman that I feel like we haven't probably talked about enough, this run game has depth, and so does the offensive line. And so I think it lends itself well to being able to get more movement with that side of the ball and being able to be dynamic in that way. And I think it's also going to help the fact that Sellers is a mobile quarterback, so he can run too if needed. And I feel like we're going to see a lot. I think definitely in the first game we'll get a good sign of what the run game could look like. And I definitely think it's going to make South Carolina's offense a lot more consistent and dynamic this year. But a little more on Ja'Kai here. One thing that was interesting, South Carolina football's SID, Steve Fink, was saying something along the lines of Ja'Kai is the most experienced offensive lineman for this team, or has like the most starts or something like that. So Jakai's entering his 6th year with the program. He's been here since 2019. He's been through all the changes and seen a lot, done a lot. And so, his big thing this year is he's obviously trying to, go out the right way in his final year. And by doing so, that means, taking younger guys under his wing. There's a few freshman offensive linemen that have a lot of potential, but having someone like Ja'Kai to go ahead and mentor those guys and help shape them into better players up front and kind of understand what the college game is like, I think that's going to be so, so critical. He was talking about Josiah Thompson today and how, he's a guy that puts his head down and works, and that's really all you can ask for. And, Josiah, number one offensive lineman in the state of South Carolina in the class of 2024. So he's got a lot of potential. I think we saw him out at practice the other day, working at least what it looked like with the ones at left tackle. So, I think Josiah's got a lot of potential to be that guy this year on the offensive line. But again, you also have guys like Marquis Anderson, who Ja'Kai was talking about, saying that he looks fantastic out there and has been looking really strong. And definitely he thought he was going to be the guy to see some snaps last year, but that obviously wasn't the case because he did get hurt and whatnot. So that kind of derailed things. But I think this offensive line is in a good spot. Like I said before, I think depth is definitely the buzzword that you're going to hear a lot this, through this next month. And it's true. I mean, you got like 10 guys that can really be potential starters this season. And I think that's something that is going to be really, good for this team this year up front, because obviously the offensive line was just horrendous last year. And I think heading into this season, we don't know who the starters are going to be yet. But I feel like with any of these guys that we're talking about here, whether it's Ja'Kai Moore, Marquis Anderson, Kason Henry, Josiah Thompson, guys like that, they can all go out there and do the job, and we'll see what happens. But it's good to have that type of competition. And yeah, kind of going back to some of the questions here. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome in to GC Live, and happy Tuesday. But I did talk about Rocket Sanders and Lenore Sellers a little earlier, and this video will be on our YouTube page under the live section. So if you miss anything, you can go back after we're done here and, listen into what I had said before. But Rocket's good. Rocket Sanders is healthy and he's feeling good. Wrote a story about him on GamecockCentral.com just earlier. So go ahead and check that out if you haven't yet. It's a great story about how this summer really what went into the preparation and kind of what he went through recovery wise to get back to where he's at now. So, and Nick Harbor, that was one guy we did not get to speak to today, but we did get to talk to a few other receivers, and we got to talk to some of the incoming receivers, transfer wise, such as Dale Von Campbell, who, if you do not know the name, you might want to get to know it, because he is going to be. We talk about Nick Harbor being the big guy in the receiver room for this group. I mean, Dale Von Campbell is 6'4", 220 pounds. So, he might not be taller than Nick, but he's definitely going to be a guy that, in a receiver room that you might consider to be relatively small with size and stuff. Dale Von could be a guy that, goes up for balls and makes big plays. And that's kind of what he talked about today as some of his strengths. It's been an easy fit and transition for him to, come in here this summer after transferring from Nevada. And this will be his third stop because he also played at Illinois before Nevada. But he said he can go up and make plays on the deep balls. The one thing he wants to kind of hone in on and correcting as the season approaches, his change of direction and being more efficient in that type of way. So I guess, in terms of making a turn on a corner route or something like that. Just examples like that where he's turning his body and coming back in on a ball, for instance. So he's a guy that we really haven't heard a ton from. I believe this was his first time outside of media day last week, his first time talking in the press conference setting to us. So I was interested to hear what he had to say. He's been around now. This will be his 6th year. And again, he's a guy that, like I said, he's got size. That's something that South Carolina doesn't necessarily have. They have some smaller receivers. But to that point, these guys are also quick and shifty. So I think that can play to their strengths a little bit. That's something that kept kind of getting hit on today. But one interesting thing I wanted to talk about with Dale Vaughn is, someone asked him about, Xavier Leggett and if he's drawn any comparisons to a guy like that, because I think when you kind of look at the tape, they do have similar body types, right? I mean, this dude is jacked. Like, he is ripped, man. And that all goes back to the workout program this summer with Luedecke and the strength and conditioning team getting these guys in such great shape. And Dale Vaughn, I think, is one of the prime examples of the transformation and such. But talking about a little bit more of the XL Dale Vaughn Campbell comparison, it does make a little sense, right? And he has watched film on Xavier, obviously, before coming to South Carolina. He knows what type of player that dude is. But one interesting thing he did bring up is that he tries to watch film on as many wide receivers in the college game as possible. And he kind of made it sound like he watches everyone's tape and stuff, which is really neat and a different perspective that at least I haven't really heard before, which I thought was neat. But what he kind of was saying about that was that, with watching so much film on other players that, he's seeing on tape, he's trying to see if he can not model his game after them necessarily, but see if they do anything specific to where he can take that and try to incorporate it into his own game. So I think that's a really smart type of approach. He listed a few specific examples that I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but again, that video will be posted on GamecockCentral.com later on today, sometime later on. But that's kind of an interesting thing that I kind of took away from it. But again, he also, talking on what he said today, he wants to be someone that can prove he's one of the best receivers in the nation. But at the same time, he also wants to prove that he's a good team player and can play at the highest level in the SEC. Because again, it's totally different from playing at Nevada, when you're in the Mountain West and stuff, the other side of the country. And, you're also playing in the Big Ten at Illinois. But this is his real opportunity, in his 6th year to show what he can do. And this is a guy that was solid. I mean, he's appeared in 47 games at the Division I level with 17 starts. He's got 76 catches for 1,159 yards, averaging 15.3 yards per catch with 3 touchdowns. So I think that's the 15.3 yards per catch is a great number. And I think that can be beneficial for Carolina in terms of the deep ball game. I think if you need a guy like Nick Harbor or Dale Vaughn Campbell to go downfield and make a catch, I feel like you can feel pretty confident about that, almost every time. But with Nick, I feel like it's a little more of a process just because, talking to him the other day at media day, he's a guy that said he hasn't done a ton of deep ball routes, a ton of go routes. So maybe that's something we see incorporated this year. And I think I'm interested to see how Dow Loggins maybe wants to try to utilize the bigger receivers in his room to their strengths, right? If they're taller than a DB by a few inches, why not try to have them go up for some balls and make big plays? So I thought that was a really interesting point that was brought up today. And so I know the weather is not exactly great outside right now. I saw a photo on Twitter. Not to get completely sidetracked here, we'll get back to the football discussion here in a second. We still got about a few guys to talk about. But there's a photo. I want to say it was in Monk's Corner which is out near Charleston, and it was like an Arby's that was like torn apart from the weather. It looked awful. So I know the weather has been really bad, especially down in the low country of South Carolina. The rain's been it's been steady here, I would say, for the last few days, but hopefully not a ton of flooding or anything. So y'all definitely stay safe out there, wherever you guys are listening from, and hopefully, listening into me talk some football here will bring you some comfort in these tough times. But kind of getting back on the subject of football, we still got a few guys to talk about. Another receiver I want to talk about here is a new name, new guy that joined the team this summer, is Vandravius Jacobs, who transferred in from Florida State, joined the team in the summer, like I said, and he is a guy that was a part of the team last year for Florida State that went 13-0, and then obviously got left out of the college football playoff. He did see some action in the Orange Bowl last year. Caught 3 passes for 60 yards and a touchdown last season as a true freshman. So not a ton of playing time, not a big sample size to go off of. I mean, if you want to kind of go back to his high school days at Vero Beach in Florida, caught 149 passes for 2,320 yards and 31 touchdowns in 2 seasons there. And crazy good number here. I mean, he averaged 105 yards per game as a senior. So, if South Carolina is able to get any bit of that type of player with the athleticism he seems to have, that'd be great. And coming from the Florida State ranks last year, I think that's good to have someone that has, been a part of a team that is fighting for a CFP spot and stuff. And I think that could be valuable. But much like Dale Von Campbell, he talked about how he's fitting in well. All the guys around him have made him feel comfortable and whatnot. So I think it goes back to that point I made earlier about the fact that while there are competitions at nearly every position right now, it's not all about competing against everyone, and it's you versus the world, that type of mentality. It's more so about while there is a competition going on, it's you can help the other guys in the room get better at their games, so that way you're better as a team moving forward. And so I think I really love that mentality that these guys all seem to have, and I think that goes for Jacobs as well. Talking about how the guys are in that room have helped him adjust kind of rather quickly here. In terms of strengths with him, he kind of thinks of himself as a deep threat, but he's also going to play wherever he fits best in the system. And, like I said before, he's kind of going through practice for the first time at South Carolina here. And it was funny. He was talking about how the heat has really gotten to him in these first few days. And I think we all know, especially those of us who are now Columbia residents and whatnot, we know how bad the heat can get in this state, in this city. And, there are days in August where it's going to be 100 degrees. And luckily right now it's raining. So I'm sure these guys are in the indoor facility and whatnot. But, with the heat, those first few days, they were outdoors when it was nice out. And despite being early in the morning, it's still blazing out by that time of day. So that's taken him a little bit to get used to. But Jacobs did say he felt the best he has out at practice earlier today. And again, I'm sure they were in the indoor facility because of the rain and stuff. But it's been all good for him so far. He was a guy that we also did see during our 2 open practice sessions at punt returner. And that's a whole nother discussion here, is that the punt returning duties are wide open right now, and it really could be anyone's job. But Jacobs was one of the guys, out there catching punts, on day 1 and 2 of practice. So that is something that, he did at Florida State. So he's used to it. And the kind of the key to making that kind of, how different is it compared to catching regular passes? He said you really just have to use receiver instincts to catch the ball, and you got to make sure you got the right fundamentals out there. So it seems like he's going to be a really nice piece for this receiver room, and I'm really interested to see what he does. I feel like Jacobs and Campbell can provide a nice uh, balance and different look in this room. Again, depth is the key word today. There are a lot of guys in this room that can go out there and make plays. I think the names that I am interested most to see out there in action this fall, I would say Nick Harbor's probably number one. Number two is probably Dale Von Campbell, just because he's got the size. He seems to be able to make big plays, and so I think that's something that this team sorely needs. But let's also keep names in mind like AHB and Gage Larverdane and Mazio Bennett. Maybe he's another name that we see kind of move into the fold here and get some reps as a starter this year. I personally would love to see it. But we're going to have to see what happens. And speaking of Gage Larverdane, he was our first guy we spoke to today, and then we'll get into Alex Herrera here to close things out. But again, he's another transfer receiver. It's been like the other guys, good adjustment for him so far. The big thing that he said today is that they've got a group of guys who are all hungry to compete and make themselves better and make each other better. So they're gelling right now. He said it's a healthy competition. A lot of guys are standing out. Didn't get into specifics on like who, but again, it is good to see that the wide receiver room seems to really be in sync right now. And he was asked a little bit about. I brought up the size factor earlier and the fact that outside of Nick Harbor and Dale Von Campbell, this room isn't exactly like Xavier Leggett size all around. You have your smaller guys in the room. It's kind of like a Marion Brown type, look with some of these guys in terms of size. But the benefit to that is he thinks it's an advantage with the types of receivers they have. And he said not to be cocky, but he said have fun covering them in terms of opponents out there going up against these guys. So he thinks the size isn't really an issue. Rather, the speed and quickness and the other abilities these guys have are way more of a strength and outweigh any cons when it comes to this room. And he says, if you're looking at this receiving room as a disadvantage, then you shouldn't be here. And I think that's a great point that he brings up. And again, he's one of the guys that has been out there catching punts, and he believes that, Shane and the staff will put the best guy back there to help the team win. He's been out there catching punts, and it's a different look at times, but at the same time, it's part of the job and it's what he's got to do. And and he also spoke a little bit on Campbell and Jacobs, and he said they've been looking good so far. They had some height to the room, both great players and people, and they're already making an immediate impact. So all good things pretty much on all fronts today. And lastly, what kind of, we're talking about all these positions here. We would be mistaken if we left out special teams in any sort of way. And all the competitions going on, we have another one that maybe we're not talking about enough. And I think with the kicking room, two guys competing for starting kicking duties, Alex Herrera, who we'll get to in a second, and William Joyce. And you could also maybe throw Mason Love's name in the mix, but I did speak to him a little bit last week. Going to pop a story on him at some point here soon. Not sure when, but I did ask him, what are you kind of looking at right now in terms of what the team wants from you? And it's more so kickoff and, backup punting duties and stuff, with Kai Kroger being the guy. So, and a little bit of place holding. So I think that's all good. But with the kicking room battle, I think that's definitely an interesting one. No Parker White anymore. No Mitch Jeter. These are guys that have been consistently pretty good kickers for South Carolina in the past. And throughout that whole process, Alex Herrera has been a guy that's been here. He's been behind all these guys. He's waited his turn, and he got put on scholarship in the spring. And he, right now, I would say, is probably the guy that's going to be starting a kicker this year for South Carolina with kicking field goals and whatnot. And, I think it's a real testament to the fact that he, like I said before, has been waiting his turn. He, has sat behind, gotten limited reps during games at kicker and stuff. And now it looks like in his final year of college eligibility, he's going to be the guy for this team. And how will that look? We're not sure yet. But I think the talent is there to do it. We're just gonna have to see how it translates over. But during the winter, he did bruise his heel bone, but he said it's perfectly fine now, and that shouldn't be an issue by any means. And so during practice, I thought this was interesting. All the kickers are obviously taking reps during practice, but the way it kind of works is that he said they rotate each day with who kicks field goals and kickoffs. So one day, Herrera will be kicking field goals, and the next, his focus will be on kickoffs and whatnot. And so I think that's really interesting to make sure everyone in this battle with Joyce and himself, and maybe Mason Love too, all get a crack at doing everything. And it's not like you're going back and forth at it every day with two guys kicking. It's one guy kicks field goals one day, one guy does kickoff. So I think that's particularly interesting. And he also said Joe DeCamillis, the special teams coordinator, entering his first season at South Carolina after being in the NFL for so long, and Pete Lembo no longer being here now that he's at Buffalo. He said Jody's been great. He's introduced some new drills, with or without a ball. And the one thing they do different this year compared to last year, and it was a very specific point, in the third period of practice every day, they'll go into the weight room and they'll do some stretching. They'll roll out, get their body as loose and right as possible. And then they'll go back out and, kick. And he said they all like it, and it better gets them warmed up. And it seems like it's been translating over pretty well for Herrera. He's been kicking pretty well in practice, he said. Did a lot of work during the offseason. And I think, it's not going to be, your Mitch Jeter, Parker Whites of the world, the names that we're so used to hearing. It's Alex Herrera, a guy that has seen limited kicking time on the field. But I think he feels confident enough in himself to where he can be that answer for South Carolina this season. And we know how much of an issue special teams was at times last year. And Mitch Jeter wasn't, perfect like he was in 2022. So a return to form at kicker would be nice this year with field goals. And I'm interested to see if Herrera can be that guy. Who steps up? Travis Weathers asks. I would say Herrera is the kicker this year. Punter is obviously going to be Kai Kroger. I think kickoff duties will probably go to Mason Love and maybe William Joyce. I'm not sure. But it looks like Herrera would probably be the guy to win that battle right now. And so I think that covers just about every single player that, again, we spoke to at offensive media availability earlier today. We'll hear from the defensive guys tomorrow at 11:45 a.m. So if you are a Gamecock Central subscriber, go to the Insiders Forum around that time. I'll have a post there, and I'll be providing live updates as to who speaks. And we don't know who will speak yet. We really don't find out, honestly, until the guys get into the room. It's kind of just like, the way it works is we, request specific guys that we want to talk to. Maybe we'll get them, maybe we don't. And then we just find out who they are and who we'll be talking to once we get there. So should be interesting. I'm sure we're going to hear from guys like Debo Williams, maybe like, some of the D linemen, maybe Bam Martin Scott, obviously probably Nicky Manwari, DQ Smith, guys like that, I would imagine. But again, we'll have to see what happens, and really looking forward to it. And then on Saturday, there will be a scrimmage at Williams-Brice Stadium, again, closed to the public and the media. But after the scrimmage, we'll get the chance to talk with head coach Shane Beamer and hear his thoughts on how the scrimmage went. And that should be really interesting. So be sure to stay locked into GamecockCentral.com for coverage from offensive player media availability. Going to have a lot of stories coming out here pretty soon. Be sure to stay on the lookout later today. I'll have a Lenore Sellers story coming out. I spoke to him earlier today. And then some other guys down the road this week. And should be really good. Same thing with defensive guys and all that moving forward. So, that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and have a wonderful rest of your day.